Ambassador Vexstar stood in the observation deck of Kepler Prime Station, watching the small human ship approach through the stars. His blue skin shimmered with nervous patterns that his species used to show worry. After 300 years of diplomatic service to the Galactic Council, he had welcomed dozens of new species into their great family of civilizations. But something felt different about these humans from the planet called Earth. The communication had been simple enough. The humans had just learned to send messages faster than light. Their first transmission was basic but polite. They wanted to meet, they wanted to learn about the galaxy. They promised to come in peace. All new species said these things, but Vexstar believed them. There was something honest in their simple words. "Ambassador," his assistant Keller whispered, "the human ship is very small for a first contact mission." Vexstar nodded. Most species brought huge ships filled with soldiers and weapons when they first met the Council. They wanted to show their strength. The human vessel was barely larger than a cargo transport. Either these humans were very confident, or they were very foolish. The ship docked with a soft thud that vibrated through the station's metal walls. Vexstar adjusted his formal robes and walked toward the meeting chamber. Representatives from 12 Council species had gathered to meet. Earth's children. The room buzzed with quiet conversation in different alien languages. The doors opened with a hiss of air. 2 humans walked in and the room fell silent. Vexstar had studied the biological data the humans had sent ahead. He knew they were bipedal, mammals with internal skeletons and warm blood. But seeing them in person was different. They moved with a strange confidence, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Not in fear, but with the look of creatures that were always ready for something to happen. The first human was tall and wore a dark blue uniform with shiny metal decorations. His black hair was cut short and neat. "I am Captain Lee Taemin of the Earth Defense Force," he said in clear galactic standard language. "This is our diplomatic liaison, Park Sojin." The female human stepped forward. She was smaller than the captain, but carried herself with the same quiet confidence. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple style. She wore clothes that looked both formal and practical. "We bring greetings from Earth and hope for friendship between our peoples." Vexstar bowed in the traditional council greeting. "Welcome to Kepler Prime Station. I am Ambassador Vexstar of the Altarian Empire, speaking for the Galactic Council. We are honored to meet Earth's representatives." The formal introductions continued as each species ambassador spoke their welcome. The humans listened carefully, asking smart questions about each civilization. They seemed genuinely interested in learning about others, not just talking about themselves. What struck Vexstar most was how the humans held themselves. Every other species he had met showed some sign of being overwhelmed by first contact. The vast size of the galaxy, the age of the Council civilizations, the technology they had yet to discover, it usually made new species feel small and nervous. But these humans stood straight and calm. They treated the Council representatives as equals, not as superior beings to worship or fear. When Ambassador Felinox of the Silicon Collective mentioned that his people had been exploring space for 10,000 years, Captain Lee simply nodded and said, "We look forward to learning from your experience." The first day of meetings went well. The humans answered questions about their world and their people. Earth sounded like a pleasant enough planet, though unusually diverse in climate and geography. The humans described great cities, vast oceans, high mountains, and frozen lands at the poles. Most civilized worlds had more uniform environments. "Your planet has many different environments," observed Dr. Yolek, the Council's chief xenobiologist. "How do your people adapt to such variation?" "Park," Sojin smiled. "We are good at adapting. Humans live everywhere on Earth, from hot deserts to cold mountains. We learn to survive wherever we are." On the second day, the Council arranged a formal dinner to welcome the humans properly. The great dining hall was decorated with crystals from Altaria, floating lights from the gas giant Confederacy, and living flower sculptures from the Plant Worlds Alliance. It was meant to show the beauty and diversity of Council civilization. The humans seemed impressed but not intimidated. They asked questions about each decoration and complimented the artistry. When the food was served, they politely tried dishes from different worlds, even ones that Vexstar knew must taste strange to mammalian palates. It was during the third course that the accident happened. Park Sojin was reaching for a glass of Altarian crystal wine when her sleeve caught on a decorative sculpture. The delicate crystal toppled over and shattered on the table. Sharp fragments scattered across the white tablecloth. "Oh no," she said, immediately reaching to gather the broken pieces. "I am so sorry." That was when she cut herself. A sharp crystal edge sliced across her palm as she tried to collect the fragments. Bright red blood welled up from the wound and dripped onto the white cloth. The reaction from the alien diplomats was immediate and dramatic. Several gasped in shock. Ambassador Felinox's silicon-based form flickered with distress patterns. "Doctor." Yelek jumped up from his chair, his tentacles writhing with alarm. "Medical emergency!" Yelek called out. "Someone contact the medical bay immediately." But Park Sojin just looked at her bleeding hand and calmly said, "It is not serious. Just a small cut." She pulled a white cloth from her pocket and wrapped it around her palm, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. The cloth quickly turned red, but she simply held it tight and continued to speak. "Please do not worry," she said to the alarmed aliens. "I am very sorry about the sculpture. Is it possible to replace it?" Vexstar stared at her in amazement. The human was bleeding, actually leaking her life fluid, and she was apologizing about the broken decoration. She showed no signs of pain, no panic, no call for help among the Altarians. Even a tiny injury required immediate medical attention and pain management. Most species in the Council were the same. Pain was something to be avoided at all cost, and injury meant immediate medical care and rest. But this human was conducting a diplomatic conversation while her blood soaked through the cloth wrapped around her hand. "Should we not take you to the medical facility?" Vexstar asked carefully. Park Sojin looked surprised. "For this small cut?" "That is not necessary. It will heal in a few days." She unwrapped the cloth to show them. The cut was about 2 inches long and still bleeding slowly. To Vexstar, it looked like a serious wound that would require surgical attention. "It does not hurt much," she continued, wrapping the cloth back around her hand. "I have had much worse injuries. This is nothing." The dinner continued, but the alien diplomats kept staring at Park Sojin. She ate her food one-handed, participated in conversations, and seemed completely unbothered by her injury. When Captain Lee asked if she needed medical attention, she just shrugged and said she would clean it properly later. After the dinner, Vexstar found himself walking with Dr. Yelek toward their quarters. "Did you see that?" the xenobiologist whispered. She continued bleeding for over an hour and acted like nothing was wrong. "I saw," Vexstar replied. "What kind of species treats injury so casually?" "I do not know," Yelek admitted. "But I am beginning to think there is more to these humans than we realized." That night, Vexstar lay in his sleeping chamber thinking about what he had witnessed. The human's reaction to injury was unlike anything he had seen in 3 centuries of diplomatic service. Most species would have been incapacitated by the pain and shock of such a wound, but Park Sojin had treated it like a minor inconvenience. He made a mental note to request more detailed biological information about humanity. Something told him that understanding these creatures would require more study than usual. In the morning, Park Sojin appeared at breakfast with a small bandage on her hand. When asked how she felt, she smiled and said, "Much better. It has almost stopped bleeding." Vexstar noticed that she used her injured hand normally, showing no sign that it hurt or limited her movement. For the first time in his long career, the ambassador wondered if the Council truly understood what kind of beings they were welcoming into galactic civilization. 3 months after first contact, Dr. Kethelin sat in his research laboratory staring at data that made no sense. The Altarian xenobiologist had spent weeks studying the environmental information that Earth scientists had provided about their homeworld. Every time he reviewed the numbers, he became more confused and worried. "This cannot be correct," he muttered to himself. Checking the calculations for the fifth time that day. According to the data, Earth should be completely uninhabitable. The planet was classified as a Class 12 deathworld according to Council standards. Only the most extreme and dangerous planets in the galaxy received such a rating. Yet somehow, billions of humans not only lived there, but thrived. Dr. Kethelin had requested additional information from Earth scientists, and they had been happy to provide it. A human named Dr. Kim Min-ho had sent detailed video logs showing different parts of their world. Another human, an explorer called Choi Hai-jin, had contributed recordings from her travels to what humans called remote locations. The first video showed Dr. Kim Min-ho standing in what he called a tropical rainforest. Behind him, Kethelin could see plants growing so thick and wild that they blocked out most of the sunlight. The humidity readings on the screen showed levels that would kill most civilized species within hours. "This is the Amazon rainforest," Dr. Kim explained cheerfully. "It covers over 5 million square kilometers of our planet. The biodiversity here is incredible. We have discovered millions of species of plants, animals, and insects living together in this ecosystem." Kethelin paused the video and studied the background. He could see vines as thick as his arm hanging from enormous trees. Colorful birds flew between branches that looked strong enough to crush a ground vehicle. Strange sounds echoed from the dense foliage, sounds that suggested large, dangerous creatures moving through the undergrowth. And humans live in this environment? He asked the empty laboratory. The next video was even more disturbing. Choi Hai-jin stood on top of what she called Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth. She was covered in thick clothing and breathing through some kind of mask, but she was smiling and waving at the camera. "The air up here is very thin," she explained, her voice slightly muffled by the breathing device. "Most people cannot survive at this altitude without help. The temperature is -40 degrees and the wind can reach over 200 kilometers per hour. Kethelin checked the atmospheric readings. The oxygen level was so low that most council species would lose consciousness within minutes. The cold was severe enough to freeze body fluids. The wind speeds were comparable to those found on gas giants, yet this human was standing there casually, as if visiting one of the most deadly environments on her planet was a normal activity. "But the view is amazing," Troy continued, turning the camera to show a vast landscape of snow-covered peaks stretching to the horizon. "This is why we climb mountains, to see things like this." Kethelin replayed that part 3 times. The human had climbed to this deadly place voluntarily, just to look at the scenery. She had risked her life for entertainment. The videos continued, each one more shocking than the last. Humans diving deep into oceans where the pressure would crush most spaceships. Humans living in deserts where the daytime temperature exceeded the boiling point of water. Humans building cities in regions where the ground shook regularly from seismic activity. One video showed a human named Jang Suho surfing on enormous waves during what he called a storm season. The waves were taller than buildings, and the wind was strong enough to tear apart most council structures. Lightning flashed constantly in the dark sky above. "This is definitely dangerous," Jang admitted as he rode a wave that looked like a moving mountain of water. "But it is also the most exciting thing you can do on Earth. The adrenaline rush is incredible." Kethelin had to look up the word adrenaline. When he learned it was a chemical that humans produce naturally in response to danger and stress, he became even more concerned. These creatures actually created drugs in their own bodies that made them seek out dangerous situations. The biological data was equally disturbing. Humans could survive without food for weeks and without water for days. Their bodies could heal from injuries that would permanently disable most species. They could function normally in gravity fields that would crush smaller beings and adapt to atmospheric conditions that would poison others. But the most shocking discovery came when Kethelin began studying Earth's native life forms. The planet was crawling with predators. Dr. Kim's videos showed creatures called lions that hunted in coordinated groups and could run faster than most council ground vehicles. There were sharks in the oceans that were essentially living weapons with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Flying creatures called eagles that could spot prey from kilometers away and dive at speeds that would kill most beings on impact. These are some of Earth's apex predators, Dr. Kim explained calmly as images of terrifying creatures flashed across the screen. They are perfectly adapted to their environments and play important roles in maintaining ecological balance. Kathleen paused the video and stared at a close-up image of a creature called a grizzly bear. It was massive, covered in thick fur, and equipped with claws longer than his fingers. Its teeth were designed for tearing flesh. According to the data, it could run faster than most council citizens could drive, and was strong enough to overturn small vehicles. And humans share their planet with thousands of these creatures? He whispered, but the truly terrifying revelation came when he discovered that humans were not just surviving alongside these predators, they were competing with them. And winning. A video from Choi Hai-jin showed her camping in what she called their country. She had set up a small shelter in a forest where the massive predators lived and hunted. When Kathleen asked how she protected herself, she showed him a small canister of chemical spray and a loud noise-making device. These usually work to scare bears away, she explained. But the most important thing is to not act like prey. You have to show confidence and make yourself look big and threatening. Kathleen could not believe what he was hearing. This small human was telling him that the way to survive encounters with massive predators was to intimidate them. She was describing psychological warfare against creatures that could tear her apart with their claws. The more he studied, the more he realized that Earth was not just a dangerous planet, it was a world actively trying to kill everything that lived on it. Severe weather systems regularly destroyed entire regions. Volcanic eruptions buried landscapes under molten rock. Earthquakes split the ground open without warning. The very air sometimes became toxic during events humans called storms. Yet, not only did humans survive all of this, they seemed to enjoy it. One video showed a group of humans deliberately chasing a rotating windstorm called a tornado. They drove vehicles directly toward the deadly phenomenon while taking measurements and photographs. Storm chasing is a popular hobby, explained the narrator. It requires skill, courage, and a deep understanding of weather patterns. But the experience of seeing nature's power up close is worth the risk. Kathleen had to step away from his desk and walk around the laboratory. These humans were not just adapted to their deadly world, they actively sought out its most dangerous aspects. For fun, he began to compile his report for the council, but the more he wrote, the more disturbed he became. Every section of his analysis painted the same picture. Humans were not like other civilized species. They were something entirely different. Other council species had evolved on peaceful worlds with stable climates and gentle ecosystems. They had developed technology to protect themselves from their environments and eventually learned to travel to the stars in search of even safer, more comfortable worlds. Humans had evolved on a planet that was actively hostile to life. They had been shaped by millions of years of surviving disasters, predators, and environmental extremes that would have wiped out most other species. Instead of being weakened by this constant struggle, they had become stronger. They are not really a civilized species, Kathleen realized as he wrote his conclusions. They are barely controlled predators who learned to build spaceships. His final report was 27 pages long and included over 300 video examples and biological measurements. The conclusion was simple but terrifying. Humans were the survivors of a Class 12 deathworld, and their entire biology and psychology had been shaped by eons of warfare against their own planet. When he submitted the report to the council archives, Kathleen included a personal note that would later prove prophetic. We have assumed that intelligence naturally leads to peaceful civilization. The humans suggest this may not always be true. We should be very careful about what we have invited into our galaxy. 3 days after submitting his report, Kathleen received a message from the Council Defense Committee requesting an urgent meeting. They wanted to discuss the strategic implications of humanity's biology. For the first time since beginning his research, Kethelin wondered if the Council's interest in these Deathworld survivors was entirely scientific. The timing seemed suspicious, coming so soon after reports of increased aggression from the Outer Rim territories. As he prepared for the meeting, one thought kept returning to his men. General Zarthik of the Galactic Council Defense Force stood before the massive holographic display in the war room of Zarian 7 training facility. Around him, military observers from 15 different species watched as another council squad failed the hostage rescue simulation for the 4th time that day. "Simulation terminated," announced the computer in its calm, mechanical voice. "All hostages eliminated. Mission failure." The general's forearms crossed in frustration as he watched the holographic enemies fade away. The Regilon assault team emerged from the training complex looking defeated and confused. Like all the others before them, they had been wiped out within minutes of entering the hostile environment. "The scenario is impossible," complained Captain Velther of the Silicon Collective Forces. "The enemy positions are too well defended, and the hostages are placed in locations that cannot be reached without triggering the automated defenses." General Zarthik had heard the same complaint from every team that attempted the simulation. The scenario was designed to be extremely difficult, representing the kind of real-world situations that Council forces might face against determined enemies. It was meant to test tactical thinking, coordination, and adaptability under pressure. So far, no team had even come close to success. "Perhaps we should modify the parameters," suggested Colonel Frixon of the Aquatic Confederation. "The current setup may be beyond the capabilities of any military force." The general was about to agree when a voice spoke up from the back of the observation area. "We would like to try." Everyone turned to see Sergeant Yun Dongwu of the Earth Defense Force walking forward. Behind him stood Corporal Lim Ji-young and 3 other human soldiers. They had been observing the training exercises for 2 days as part of the cultural exchange program established after first contact. "With all due respect, Sergeant," General Zarthik said carefully, "your people are new to galactic military doctrine. This scenario has defeated our most experienced units." Yun Dongwu nodded politely. "We understand. But we would still like to attempt it. Our approach may be different." The general looked around at the other observers. Several were making gestures that indicated amusement or disbelief. The humans had no advanced weapons technology, no energy shields, and no experience with the sophisticated tactics used by Council forces. Their request seemed almost naive. "Very well," the general decided. "But please understand that there is no shame in failing this particular test. We can arrange a simpler scenario if you prefer." "Thank you, but we will try the same simulation." The others attempted, Corporal Lim replied. "We have been studying the layout and the enemy positions." The humans were equipped with standard Council training weapons and protective gear. They looked strangely primitive compared to the high-tech equipment used by other species, but they seemed comfortable with the basic tools. As they prepared to enter the simulation, General Zarthik noticed something unusual about their behavior. Most Council species spent time before missions discussing detailed tactical plans, assigning specific roles, and coordinating their advanced equipment. The humans did something much simpler. They gathered in a tight circle and spoke quietly to each other for less than 2 minutes. Then Sergeant Yun looked at his team and said, "Ready?" 4 voices answered as one, "Ready." The simulation began. The training complex was designed to represent a fortified enemy compound with multiple levels, hidden passages, and dozens of automated defense systems. Somewhere inside, holographic hostages waited to be rescued. The enemy AI was programmed to use advanced tactics and overwhelming firepower to stop any rescue attempt. General Zarthik expected the humans to enter through the main access points like every other team had done. Instead, they did something completely unexpected. They split up within seconds of entering the complex. The 5 humans scattered in different directions. This violated every principle of Council military doctrine, which emphasized staying together and maintaining unified command structure. "What are they doing?" Colonel Frixon asked in confusion. "They are abandoning all coordination." But as the observers watched the multiple camera feeds, they began to realize that the humans were not abandoning coordination at all. They were using a completely different kind of teamwork. Corporal Lim had found a maintenance shaft that led to the lower levels. Instead of calling for backup, she simply said, "Going down." 2 minutes. Her voice was calm and quiet, transmitted through the standard communication system. "Copy," came Sergeant Yoon's equally calm response. "In position in 3 minutes." On another screen, they could see Private Park Min-soo crawling through an air ventilation system that no other species had even noticed. He was moving toward the enemy command center while 2 of his teammates created distractions on opposite sides of the complex. "They are acting independently," observed Dr. Yellick, who had come to watch the exercise. "But somehow they are still working together." What the observers were witnessing was something no galactic military had ever seen before. The humans moved like a pack of predators, each individual following their own path but all working toward the same goal. They communicated with brief, efficient words that somehow conveyed complete tactical information. "Contact left," reported Private Choi Sang-ho as he engaged a group of holographic enemies. "Moving to flank," came the immediate response from somewhere else in the complex. The humans did not fight the way Council forces did. Council doctrine emphasized overwhelming technological superiority and careful, methodical advances. Each soldier had a specific role and followed detailed plans. The humans seemed to make up their tactics as they went along. When Private Park encountered a locked door, he did not call for a specialist with electronic braking tools like other species would. He simply found another route and reported, "Door sealed. Taking alternate path." When Corporal Lim discovered that the ventilation shaft she was using led to a room full of enemies, she did not retreat to regroup. Instead, she said quietly, "Multiple targets." Going loud in 10 seconds. What happened next shocked every observer in the war room. The moment Corporal Lim attacked her targets, every other human in the complex began moving faster and more aggressively. They had not been told what she was doing, but somehow they all knew that stealth was no longer possible. "They are adapting instantly to changing conditions," General Zarthik realized, without direct communication or orders. The final phase of the rescue was unlike anything the observers had ever seen. When Sergeant Yoon reached the room where the hostages were being held, he found it heavily defended by automated weapons and holographic enemies. Previous teams had been destroyed trying to break through these defenses. Yoon did not try to break through. Instead, he simply said, "Hostage room. Need chaos in 30 seconds. What followed was perfectly coordinated mayhem. Private Park began attacking the command center, causing alarms to sound throughout the complex. Private Choi started a fire in the power generation room, forcing the automated systems to redirect resources. Corporal Lim began hunting down enemy patrols, making them think they were under attack from multiple directions. While the defenders were distracted by crises throughout the facility, Sergeant Yoon slipped into the hostage room through a route that was now unguarded. He eliminated the remaining guards and began leading the hostages to safety. "All hostages secure," he reported. "Extraction in 2 minutes." The team regrouped at the exit with a speed and efficiency that seemed impossible. They had rescued all hostages, eliminated most of the enemy forces, and suffered only minor injuries. The entire operation took 8 minutes and 37 seconds. The war room was completely silent as the simulation ended, and the humans emerged from the training complex. They were talking quietly among themselves, apparently discussing what they could have done better. General Zarthik stared at the mission results displayed on the holographic screen. "Complete success, all objectives achieved. Minimal resource expenditure." "How?" Colonel Frickson whispered. "How did they coordinate so effectively with so little communication?" Dr. Yelek was studying the tactical recordings with obvious fascination. "They were not following individual plans," he observed. "They were following a pack-hunting strategy that their species must have used for millions of years." "Pack hunting?" the general asked. "Yes, watch how they moved." The doctor replayed key moments from the simulation. Each individual was hunting Independently, but all were working toward the same goal. When one made contact with the enemy, the others automatically adjusted their positions and tactics. When the situation changed, they all adapted together without needing to discuss new plans. But how did they know what the others were doing? I believe they were reading subtle cues in each other's voices, movements, and timing. Humans evolved as cooperative predators. This kind of coordination may be instinctive for them. General Zarthik turned to Sergeant Yoon, who was checking his equipment while his team prepared to leave. "Sergeant, may I ask how you planned that operation?" Yoon looked surprised by the question. "We did not plan much, sir. We studied the layout, identified the problems, and agreed on the basic goal. Then we adapted to the situation as we found it." "But how did you coordinate so effectively without detailed communication?" The human thought for a moment. "The war began on a Tuesday. Admiral Nexval of the Galactic Council received the emergency transmission while reviewing supply reports in his comfortable office on the command station orbiting Alteria Prime. The message was brief and terrifying. The Zephyrian Hive had attacked 3 Council worlds simultaneously, destroying the orbital defense platforms and landing massive invasion forces on each planet within hours. Similar reports came from 6 more systems. The Zephyrians, who had been quiet for decades beyond the Rim territories, had launched the largest military offensive in galactic history. "How many ships do they have?" Admiral Nexval asked his tactical officer. "Initial estimates suggest over 2,000 vessels, sir. They appear to have been building their fleet in secret for many years." The Admiral's blue skin turned pale gray with shock. The Council's entire active fleet numbered fewer than 800 ships, spread across dozens of systems. They were facing an enemy with overwhelming numerical superiority. "Send word to all Council worlds. We need every available vessel." The first major battle took place in the Kepler system, where a Council fleet of 150 ships engaged a Zephyrian force twice their size. The battle followed standard galactic warfare doctrine: massive formations of ships exchanging heavy weapons. Fire until one side's losses became too great to continue. The Council forces fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. After 8 hours of intense combat, Admiral Kexler was forced to order a retreat. The surviving Council ships withdrew to the inner systems to regroup and resupply. This pattern repeated across the war zone. The Zephyrians would attack with overwhelming force. The Council would fight until their losses became critical, and then they would retreat to defensive positions. It was the way galactic warfare had been conducted for thousands of years, but the Zephyrians had adapted to this pattern. Instead of pursuing retreating fleets and risking heavy losses in extended battles, they would occupy the systems they had captured and build defensive positions. When Council forces returned weeks later, they found impenetrable fortifications that would cost tremendous resources to assault. After 3 months of warfare, the situation was desperate. The Council had lost over 40 star systems, and their fleet was reduced to fewer than 400 operational vessels. The Zephyrians controlled vast territories and showed no sign of slowing their expansion. That was when Captain Zhang Wujin of the Earth Defense Force requested a meeting with Admiral Nexval. "We would like to help," the human said simply. "Admiral." Nexval looked at the datapad showing Earth's military contributions to the war effort. 120 ships of various sizes, most of them much smaller than standard Council vessels. Their weapons were primitive by galactic standards, and they had no energy shields or advanced defense systems. "Captain, we appreciate the offer, but this is not the kind of conflict where a small force can make a significant difference. The Zephyrians have over 1,500 ships remaining and control fortified positions in dozens of systems." "We understand the situation," Captain Zhang replied, "but our approach to warfare may be different from what you have tried so far." The Admiral was about to politely decline when he remembered the reports from the training exercises on Zarion 7. The humans had solved an impossible tactical problem using methods that no Council military had ever considered. "What do you propose?" "Give U.S. 3 systems on the edge of Zephyrian territory. Let us operate independently for 6 months. If we cannot produce results, we will withdraw and support Council operations in whatever way you think best. It seemed like a pointless gesture, but Admiral Nexville was running out of options. The traditional approach was failing, and the Council needed to try something different. Very well. But please understand that we cannot provide significant support or reinforcements. We do not need them, Captain Jang said with quiet confidence. The human fleet deployed to the outer reach sectors, where Zephyrian forces controlled 3 star systems with substantial military bases. Council intelligence estimated that attacking these positions would require at least 500 ships and result in massive casualties. The humans arrived with their small, primitive vessels and began what Admiral Nexville initially assumed would be a series of quick, futile attacks. He was wrong. The first sign that something unusual was happening came 2 weeks after the human deployment. A Zephyrian patrol fleet of 30 ships encountered a human squadron near the Vega system. The brief battle followed predictable patterns. The outnumbered humans took some losses and retreated, but they did not retreat very far. 3 days later, the same Zephyrian patrol encountered the humans again. Another brief fight, another human retreat. The Zephyrian commander reported the engagements and continued his patrol duties. On the 6th day, the humans attacked again, and on the 9th day, and on the 12th day. They keep coming back, the Zephyrian commander reported to his superiors. We defeat them every time, but they do not stay away. After a month of constant small engagements, something strange began happening to the Zephyrian patrol. Their ships needed repairs from the accumulated damage of repeated battles. Their crews were exhausted from being constantly alert for human attacks. Their supply lines were strained from supporting extended patrol operations. When the humans attacked for the 15th time, the Zephyrian patrol was operating with half their ships in repair status and crews who had not had proper rest in weeks. This time, the humans won. Admiral Nexville studied the battle reports with growing amazement. The human strategy was unlike anything in military history. Instead of seeking decisive battles, they were engaging in what their Lieutenant Colonel Bei So Young called persistence hunting. They are exhausting the enemy through continuous pressure, she explained in her tactical briefing. We do not need to win every battle. We just need to make sure the enemy never gets to rest, refit, or resupply properly. The pattern spread across all 3 systems where humans were operating. Zephyrian forces would win individual battles, but they could never completely defeat the human squadrons. The humans would retreat, repair their ships quickly using mobile facilities, and return to the fight within days. Meanwhile, Zephyrian forces had to maintain their defensive positions, protect their supply lines, and keep their ships ready for combat at all times. They could not withdraw to safe areas for major repairs or crew rotation because the humans would immediately attack any weakened positions. Lieutenant Shinyuri became legendary during this phase of the war. Her task force of 12 ships spent 7 months pursuing a Zephyrian fleet across 4 star systems. Every time the Zephyrians tried to stop and establish a base, Shin's ships would appear and force them to fight or flee. We will follow them until they surrender or die, she reported to her superiors. There is no place in the galaxy where they can hide from us. The psychological impact was devastating. Zephyrian crews began reporting stress-related breakdowns and requests for transfer away from sectors where humans were operating. Their commanders complained that human tactics were unfair and unsustainable, but the humans proved that their approach was very sustainable indeed. Captain Jang had organized supply chains that could keep his ships operational indefinitely. Human crews worked in rotation systems that allowed them to maintain pressure on the enemy without exhausting themselves. Their ships were designed for quick repairs and fast deployment. Most importantly, the humans seemed to have unlimited patience for the long, grinding campaign. This is how we hunted on Earth, Captain Jang explained to Admiral Nexville during a strategy meeting. We would follow prey animals for days or weeks until they became too tired to run. Then we would take them down. But these are not animals. These are intelligent beings with advanced technology. The principle is the same. Everyone gets tired. Everyone needs rest and supplies. If you can deny them those things long enough, they become vulnerable. After 8 months of human operations, the Zephyrian forces in the 3 target systems began to collapse. Ships that had been fighting continuously for months broke down from accumulated damage. Crews requested transfers or simply abandoned their posts. Supply lines that were constantly under attack became unreliable. The final blow came when Shin Yuri's task force cornered the main Zephyrian fleet in the Alpha Centauri system. The enemy ships were operating at less than 60% efficiency. Their crews were exhausted, and they had not received proper supplies in over a month. When the humans offered surrender terms, the Zephyrian commander accepted immediately. News of the surrender spread throughout both fleets. For the first time since the war began, an entire Zephyrian sector command had been completely defeated. The Council had not achieved a single victory of this magnitude in the entire conflict. Admiral Nexville requested a full briefing from the human commanders. "How many ships did you lose?" he asked. 37 vessels destroyed, 61 damaged but repairable, Captain Zhang reported. Total crew casualties were approximately 800. The admiral checked his calculations twice. The humans had destroyed or captured over 400 enemy ships and conquered 3 star systems. According to traditional warfare models, such an operation should have cost thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of casualties. Why? The final battle of the Zephyrian War was supposed to be a siege. Admiral Nexval stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the massive fortress world of Zephyr Prime hanging in space before the assembled Council fleet. The planet's surface bristled with defensive installations, orbital platforms, and millions of enemy soldiers prepared to fight to the death. Intelligence reports estimated that taking the Zephyrian homeworld would require at least 18 months of siege warfare and cost over half the Council's remaining forces. It would be the bloodiest battle in galactic history. "All fleet commanders report ready," announced his tactical officer around Zephyr Prime. Over 600 Council ships from dozens of species had gathered for the assault. The largest military force ever assembled was preparing to break the final stronghold of their enemies. The humans were there too, of course. Captain Zhang Wujin's forces had spent the past 10 months systematically dismantling Zephyrian resistance across the outer territories. Their persistence hunting tactics had proven devastatingly effective, wearing down enemy forces until entire fleets surrendered rather than face endless pursuit. But this was different. Zephyr Prime was not a fleet that could be chased across star systems. It was a fortified world with billions of defenders who had nowhere to retreat. The humans would have to fight the same kind of direct, brutal warfare that had been bleeding the Council forces for over a year. "Begin the assault," Admiral Nexville ordered. The first wave of attacks followed standard siege doctrine. Council ships bombarded the orbital defenses while specialized vessels launched landing craft toward the planet's surface. The Zephyrians responded with massive firepower, turning space around their world into a maze of energy beams and explosive projectiles. For 6 hours, the battle raged with neither side gaining significant advantage. Council forces destroyed some orbital platforms, but the cost was enormous. Dozens of ships were lost or severely damaged for each small victory on the planet's surface. Landing forces established small footholds but could not advance against the prepared defensive positions. Every meter of ground cost dozens of casualties, and the Zephyrians seemed to have unlimited reserves. "We are losing ships faster than we can replace them," reported Admiral Kexler of the Second Fleet. "At this rate, we will be forced to withdraw within 2 days." Admiral Nexville studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The siege was following the same pattern as every major battle of the war. The Council would fight bravely, inflict damage on the enemy, but ultimately be forced to retreat due to unsustainable losses. Then something unexpected happened on the eastern continent of Zephyr Prime. A Council landing force composed mainly of Altarian Marines was being systematically destroyed by enemy artillery. The Zephyrians had surrounded the landing zone and were methodically eliminating every Council soldier who tried to advance. The human ground forces, led by Private Kang, Duhayan were attached to this landing force as observers and technical advisors. They were not supposed to participate in direct combat, as their role was to provide expertise on persistence tactics rather than assault operations. But as Private Kang watched the Altarian Marines being cut down by enemy fire, something fundamental changed in his behavior. The Altarians were not just allies, they had become his pack for months. Human forces had fought alongside council species, sharing meals, training together, and developing the kind of bonds that humans formed with their chosen families. Private Kang had personally saved the life of Lieutenant Velther during a previous engagement. He had shared stories of Earth with Commander Yelsek during long space voyages. These aliens were no longer foreign beings. They were his brothers and sisters in arms. Watching them die triggered something primal in the human psyche. "For the fallen!" Private Kang shouted, abandoning all tactical doctrine and charging directly into enemy fire. What happened next would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. The human battle cries spread through the comm channels like wildfire. Every human soldier on the planet heard it and understood its meaning. The pack was under attack. Their family was dying. It was time to abandon all restraint and unleash the full fury of their deathworld heritage. Lieutenant Colonel Bae So-young, commanding the human ground forces from orbit, heard the cry and made a decision that violated every rule of military engagement. "All human units authorize Berserker protocols," she announced calmly. "Protect the pack at all costs." The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Human soldiers who had been following careful tactical plans suddenly began fighting like the predators their species had evolved from. They stopped trying to minimize casualties and started trying to maximize damage to anyone threatening their allies. Private Park Jinwoo, who had been providing technical support to a Regilon engineering unit, grabbed the nearest weapon and single-handedly assaulted a Zephyrian strongpoint that had been holding up the advance for 3 hours. He used his own body as a shield to protect wounded Regilon soldiers while they were evacuated. Corporal Nam Subin commandeered a damaged council vehicle and drove it directly into a group of enemy artillery positions, using the explosion to clear a path for advancing Allied forces. She survived the impact and continued fighting with improvised weapons made from the vehicle's wreckage. But the most shocking transformation occurred in orbit, where the human fleet was supporting the ground assault when Captain Zhang received reports that Allied forces were being massacred on the surface. He made a decision that would define humanity's role in galactic civilization. "All ships abandon siege protocols," he announced. "We are going in close." "Sir," his tactical officer warned, "close engagement with the orbital defenses will result in massive casualties." "The pack is dying down there," Captain Zhang replied with deadly calm. "We protect the pack." The human fleet broke from the siege formation and accelerated directly toward Zephyr Prime's orbital defenses. Instead of maintaining safe distances and exchanging long-range fire, they closed to point-blank range where their primitive weapons could be most effective. The cost was enormous. Human ships began taking critical damage within minutes of entering the defensive grid. But something remarkable happened. They kept fighting. Ship after ship was critically damaged. But instead of retreating to safe areas for repairs, they continued their attacks until their weapon systems failed completely. Crews that should have been evacuating stayed at their posts to maintain fire on enemy positions. The corvette Soul's Pride lost its main drive and life support systems but continued attacking until its ammunition was exhausted. When the ship's weapons finally fell silent, the crew had held their position for 47 minutes, while other vessels used them as cover to advance deeper into the defensive grid. "They are not retreating," observed the Zephyrian orbital commander with growing panic. "Their ships are dying, but they are not retreating." The ground battle became even more intense as human forces entered what their own officers would later describe as protective frenzy mode. They stopped fighting like civilized soldiers and started fighting like the pack hunters their ancestors had been. When Sergeant Kim Tae-hoon saw a group of wounded Silicon Collective soldiers trapped by enemy fire, he did not call for backup or wait for artillery support. He simply ran straight through the kill zone, dragging injured allies to safety one by one, while ignoring the weapon's fire that was destroying his armor and tearing apart his equipment. Corporal Odasam discovered that a Zephyrian breakthrough had surrounded a medical station treating wounded council soldiers. Instead of conducting a careful tactical response, she gathered every human within communication range and led a direct assault on the enemy position. The attack succeeded, but only because the humans fought with complete disregard for their own safety. The psychological impact on the Zephyrian defenders was devastating. They had prepared for siege warfare against rational enemies who would retreat when losses became too great. They were not prepared for opponents who became more dangerous when their allies were threatened. The humans fight like madmen, reported one Zephyrian field commander. They show no regard for tactical principles or self-preservation. When we kill their allies, they become unstoppable. The turning point came when Private Kong Du Hyan, the soldier whose battle cry had started the transformation, reached the central command bunker of the eastern defensive sector. He had fought his way through 6 kilometers of enemy positions, using weapons taken from defeated opponents and improvised explosives made from damaged equipment. When he burst into the command center, he was wounded in dozens of places. His armor was completely destroyed, and he was armed with nothing but a Zephyrian energy rifle with a cracked power cell. The enemy commanders inside the bunker surrendered immediately. "We yield," announced the Zephyrian sector commander, raising his arms in the universal gesture of surrender. "Please call off your warriors." Within hours, similar scenes were playing out across the planet. Zephyrian forces that had been prepared to fight to the death were surrendering to human units that fought like forces of nature. The siege that was supposed to last 18 months ended in less than 2 days. Admiral Nexval received the surrender of the Zephyrian High Command in a ceremony that should have. 6 months after the end of the Zephyrian War, Ambassador Vexstar sat in his private study on Kepler Prime Station, staring at the most important document he had ever written. The report that lay before him would reshape how the Galactic Council understood warfare, diplomacy, and the very nature of civilization itself. The title page was simple: Analysis, Human Combat, Capabilities and Recommended Protocols for Future Galactic Defense. But the contents would change everything. Vexstar had spent decades studying different species and their military capabilities. He had analyzed the tactical doctrines of dozens of civilizations and written extensively about the evolution of galactic warfare. Nothing had prepared him for what he had witnessed during humanity's involvement in the war. The preliminary statistics were staggering enough. Human forces had achieved victory-to-loss ratios that defied every military model in Council archives. They had conquered fortified positions that should have been impregnable and defeated enemy fleets with resources that should have been inadequate, but the numbers told only part of the story. Computer, begin final recording for Section 7, Psychological Analysis. Vexstar spoke to his personal recording system. The most significant discovery of this conflict is not humanity's tactical innovation or technological adaptability. It is the revelation that this species possesses psychological characteristics that are unprecedented among known civilizations. He paused, reviewing his notes from interviews with survivors of the final battle at Zephyr Prime. Humans demonstrate what can only be described as adaptive pack loyalty. Unlike species that show loyalty only to their own kind, humans extend protective instincts to any beings they consider part of their group. This includes allies, civilians, and even former enemies who have surrendered. The door chimed, and Dr. Yelek entered the study. The xenobiologist had been working closely with Vexstar on the report, providing scientific analysis to support the diplomatic findings. "Have you finished the biological section?" Vexstar asked. "Yes, and the conclusions are disturbing," Dr. Yelek replied, settling into a chair across from the ambassador's desk. "Humans are not simply another intelligent species. They are something fundamentally different. Explain." Every other species in the Council evolved on worlds that were either peaceful or had predictable dangers. We developed intelligence as a way to avoid conflict and create safe, stable environments. Humans evolved on a world that was actively hostile to life, and their intelligence developed as a weapon. Dr. Yilek activated a holographic display showing comparative evolutionary data. Look at these neural pathway analyses. When humans encounter threats to their pack, their brain chemistry changes in ways that would be considered pathological in other species. They produce combat stimulants naturally, their pain sensitivity decreases, and their decision-making shifts from cautious survival instincts to aggressive protective behaviors. You are saying they become chemically altered during combat? Not just combat. Any situation where they perceive their group to be threatened. We documented cases during the war where humans entered this enhanced state simply because they heard that allies were in danger on the other side of a planet. Vexstar made additional notes. The implications were staggering. Humans were not just skilled warriors, they were biologically designed to become more effective fighters when protecting others. There is something else, Dr. Yelek continued. We have been studying human civilian populations since the war ended. The same protective instincts exist in their non-military personnel, meaning that every human civilian is a potential soldier. Their emergency response workers routinely risk their lives to save strangers. Their teachers will physically defend students from danger. Even their food service workers have been observed organizing group responses to protect their communities during crises. Vexstar stopped writing and stared at his colleague. You are telling me that an entire species has the psychological profile of elite military personnel. That appears to be correct. What we have been dealing with is not a military force supported by a civilian population. It is an entire civilization of warriors who have learned to be peaceful when not threatened. The next section of the report was even more sobering. Vexstar had compiled testimonies from Zephyrian prisoners of war, and their accounts painted a picture of human combat effectiveness that bordered on the supernatural. They never stopped coming, one captured Zephyrian commander had reported. We would defeat their units, destroy their vehicles, wound their soldiers, but they would keep fighting. Even when they should have been dying, they would continue attacking until we retreated or surrendered. Another prisoner had described the psychological warfare aspect. You could not break their spirit. When we killed their allies, they became more dangerous, not less. Every casualty made them fight harder instead of making them want to quit. The most chilling testimony came from a Zephyrian field commander who had fought in the final battle. They did not fight like intelligent beings. They fought like natural disasters. You cannot negotiate with a hurricane or reason with an earthquake. That is what humans become when you threaten their pack. Vexstar included a special appendix analyzing what humans called berserker protocols. The term came from their ancient history, referring to warriors who entered altered mental states during battle. The modern version was more controlled but equally terrifying, when human commanders authorized berserker protocols. Their soldiers abandoned traditional tactical thinking and fought with the single-minded purpose of protecting their allies at any cost. Unit cohesion actually improved during these episodes, as individual humans became more focused on group survival than personal safety. It is the opposite of what we would expect, Vexstar noted in his analysis. Most species become more individualistic under extreme stress. Humans become more unified. The final section of the report dealt with the strategic implications for the Galactic Council. 3 weeks after the war's end, the Council had extended an unprecedented offer to humanity. Admiral Ruhe-1 and Dr. O. Min-Young had been invited to join the High Command as Supreme Military Advisors positions. That had never existed before and carried authority equal to the Council's most senior military leaders, the humans. Had accepted, but their response had been characteristically practical. We do not want to command your forces, Admiral Ru had explained. We want to help you protect your people more effectively. Under human guidance, the Council military was being restructured around principles that had never been considered before. Instead of relying primarily on technological superiority, they were learning to use persistence tactics, adaptive coordination, and protective psychology. More importantly, humans were teaching other species how to extend their loyalty beyond their own kind. The most significant change is cultural, Vextar wrote in his conclusions. Humans do not view the Council as a collection of separate species working together for mutual benefit. They view it as their new pack, a family worth dying for. This shift in perspective was already producing results. Human advisors were working with military units from dozens of species, teaching them to fight not just for their homeworlds but for the entire galactic community. The effectiveness improvements were dramatic, but the most important. Discovery was saved for the report's final page. During the war, several incidents had occurred where human forces encountered Zephyrian civilians, non-combatants who were caught in combat zones or fleeing from battle areas. According to every principle of wartime logic, these enemy civilians should have been treated as potential threats or ignored as irrelevant to military objectives. Instead, human forces had protected them. Sergeant Kim Tae-hoon had risked his own life to evacuate Zephyrian children from a combat zone. Corporal Oh Da-sam had shared her unit's medical supplies with enemy wounded. Captain Jang himself had diverted resources from military operations to establish refugee camps for displaced Zephyrian families. When questioned about these decisions, the humans had seemed confused by the inquiries. They were civilians, Captain. Jang had explained. They were not threatening anyone. It was our job to protect them. Even though they were the enemy's people, they were not the enemy. They were just people who needed help. Vextar realized that this was the key to understanding humanity's true nature. They were not just skilled warriors or effective soldiers. They were protectors who would extend their protective instincts to anyone who needed help, regardless of species, nationality, or previous conflicts. The final paragraph of his report would become one of the most quoted passages in galactic military literature. We sought to welcome Earth's children into galactic civilization as junior partners, who could learn from our wisdom and experience. Instead, we have discovered that we needed them far more than they needed us. The galaxy is safer now, guarded by its most terrifying protectors, beings who see every inhabited world as family worth defending. 2 days after submitting his report, Vextar received notification that the Galactic Council had unanimously approved the establishment of the Human Protection Protocols. Under these new guidelines, human forces would be stationed throughout Council space not as conquerors or occupiers, but as guardians. The news was met with celebration on most worlds.